don't take it personally is probably one of the worst ways to start a conversation with someone, right? But that's what I want to talk about this week. Last week, we talked about some of my initial takeaways as I am listening to The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. And I'm still loving that book so much. But I thought it would be interesting to take a look at a similar concept, but from a different voice. So I did a little research and I discovered that this topic is covered in a book called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I have never read this book, but as I was researching this, I saw the cover and I could swear that I owned this book. So not kidding, I spent 20 minutes searching my house, just convinced it was going to be tucked away in some box somewhere. Couldn't find it. Maybe it's something that I owned a long time ago and it was one of the things I got rid of when we were moving. I don't know. But needless to say, I've never read the book. So I did a little bit of research, kind of got some summaries of it to understand the perspective that the author was putting forward in this. So the four agreements obviously implies that there are four specific kind of categories or topics that he focused on primarily in this book. And this one is actually the second agreement. And the way that he words it, so instead of the let them theory, he calls it don't take anything personally. But before we dive into this topic, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It is a huge support to me when you do that. And ring that little notification bell so that you never miss a tutorial or upload. Okay, so a specific quote from this section of the four agreements that we're going to kind of base things around loosely is this. Nothing others do is because of you. What others say and do is a projection of their own reality. Okay, so I initially have a lot of resistance to this statement. I feel like it's overgeneralized. It's leaving out a lot of circumstances where I just feel like this is not true at all. So I would hope that in the book, Don Miguel kind of clarifies who he's referring to here. But whether he did or didn't, I'm going to. I personally believe that this is meant to be applied to strangers, or at very least, people who are not central to your life. So I'm not saying that you can't apply some level of this to everyone. I mean, obviously, we're all coming into situations with our own baggage, our own perspective, our own experiences. And so, yes, of course, there are going to be situations where even somebody that you know super well and that you love is going to do or say something that has absolutely nothing to do with you in reality. It's going to come just from whatever they're dealing with in that moment. Absolutely, that's true. But I feel like this quote kind of overgeneralizes to the point where it makes it seem like nobody ever does anything for someone else or because of someone else, meaning that nothing that we do is done based on someone else's reality and what someone else might be going through, someone that we love. And I'm not even going to get into all of that because that's not what this channel is about. And I would have to dive deeper in the book, honestly, to see if that was what he meant or not. So I'm not even going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be basing my thoughts and opinions here solely on the people that we come in contact with as a business owner. So it appears that he talks about a lot of kind of main topics within this agreement, but I'm just going to focus in on three of them that I saw because they kind of spoke to me a little bit more and because I don't want this video to be 3 hours long. So the first one being what we've already been talking about, which is what other people do, it's about them and not you. And I absolutely agree with this, especially when we're talking about in business, because regardless of what the interaction, what the relationship that you're having with this particular person is, whether it's a potential client, a former client, a current client, or maybe it's a competitor or a vendor. So whoever it is that you're coming across, they're absolutely doing what's best for them. It's not their job to do what they think is best for you or even what you necessarily want them to do. For me, this kind of comes up in like maybe two main ways. And we talked about some of these last week, so I'll make sure to post the link to last week's video in case you didn't catch that. But this comes down to when you're talking about particularly a client. Not so much if you're a person who sells physical products, because then you don't tend to have the same kind of relationship with your customers that someone like me, who is a mentor or consultant or a coach, might have with their clients, where you are spending time with them, guiding them, teaching them something, and then for them not to take action, not to show up for themselves. That's an incredibly difficult thing for us as a business owner, as a mentor to handle because it makes us feel like we're failing. And this is one of those times where we need to not take it personally. It's not that you are a bad coach or that I am a bad teacher if somebody is not getting it or not making progress, no matter how much we try to help them. It's all about how they are showing up. Now, reminding us that the let them theory, and this I'm sure has an application that is similar, does not stop there. It also has let me involved. So, yes, while it's important to remember, don't take it personally, let them show up for themselves however they're ready to show up, even if that means it's not the way we want them to. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to be taking a look at what we're bringing to the table and how we're showing up and make sure that we're not being a bad mentor. As long as we know that we're showing up in the best possible way that we can, working to the best of our ability, then we need to not take it personally when they don't succeed. And the second way that I kind of want to address this is when we get negative feedback. Whether that comes in the form of maybe a negative comment on a post or a video, or maybe we've asked for feedback from former clients and we get something back that is not what we expected. I mean, when you send out a client feedback form, you're expecting all kinds of praise and things that you're going to turn into a glowing testimonial. And sometimes that's not what we're going to get. Now, I'm not saying that you should immediately dismiss all negative feedback because it could be constructive criticism, right? They could be telling you something that you didn't see, but that you're now looking at and realizing, you know what, I could have shown up in a different or better way or said that differently, explained it differently, and maybe it would have been more clear to them. So if you see something like that, then absolutely learn from it. But if that negative feedback seems to be coming from a place of them saying that they just didn't get what you promised or what you said they were going to get out of working with you, it's important that you remember they may not have shown up for themselves. So think back. Did you feel frustrated that they were not showing up for themselves? Did you feel frustrated that they didn't seem as committed or as invested as you? Because if you remember feeling that way about working with them, then chances are this is not something that you should be taking personally. This is a them thing, and you need to let them have their feelings and feel the way that they do about it, but you're not going to take it personally and make it upset you or make you change the entire way that you do things. Because if you do that, you might be depriving other people of the benefits of what you offer simply because one person kind of took out their self-anger on you. Okay, the second area that he talks about that I wanted to touch on is that it's not all about negativity. And I found this one really interesting because we often, when we're thinking about, not taking things personally and, let them and all of that, at least I took that to be mostly from a perspective of when somebody is doing something that we don't like or saying something that we don't want to hear. But it's interesting to look at it this way because, yeah, the positive feedback can sometimes also be something that we need to not take too personally. And where I assume he's going with this and where I kind of take it is that that sense of validation and worth needs to come from within. It needs to come from us, not from other people. So just because someone showers a whole lot of praise on you doesn't mean that you should automatically take your self-worth into that, because as soon as you do, you set yourself up for somebody else to be able to come in and just tear you right back down. That needs to be coming from you and from me. We need to know our own self-worth and know our own value rather than letting other people kind of feed into that too much. So the negative and the positive can be a little bit dangerous if we put too much importance on it. And the third area that he talks about that I wanted to touch on here is how this gives us freedom from external validation and allows us to live authentically. When we find that validation and that sense of worth from within, then we don't have to blow in the winds of other people's opinions and comments, which then allows us to show up authentically. But that means that you and I have the responsibility to think for ourselves, to make sure that we're staying educated and that we are building strong opinions and values so that we can show up and lead from that foundation. If we're not putting in the effort and making the time to know what we actually think and what we actually believe, rather than listening too much to what other people are saying, then we're really going to struggle with showing up authentically, because you can't be authentic if you don't know what you actually think and believe. I want to touch on one last thing, because in my research, I saw this example from the book, and it was right up my alley because it immediately brought to mind for me a scene from one of my all-time favorite movies. And maybe you'll guess what that is when I'm reading you the example. He uses the metaphor of being immune to poison. When you don't take things personally, other people's words are like a poison that has no effect on you. It essentially makes you untouchable because their opinions lose all power over you. Okay, so did you guess what my favorite movie is from that example? It's The Princess Bride, which is objectively one of the most quotable movies of all time. So drop your favorite Princess Bride quote in the comments. So as soon as I read this, I immediately pictured what is arguably one of the best and most quotable scenes from the movie. And of course, particularly this quote: "They were both poisoned. I spent the last year building up an immunity to iocane powder." Ugh, gotta love Wesley. So the man in black, or Wesley, is using this to explain to Buttercup how he knew which cup to drink from, right? But what I see in this scene is something that you and I can apply to our own businesses, and that is planning and preparation. Wesley knew that he was going to end up in a situation where he would face this poison. Now, to be fair, he was carrying the poison, so he kind of set up the situation, but he knew that this was going to come up. So rather than being afraid of it and trying to avoid it, like, I don't know, sometimes you and I do when it comes to negative feedback or things that make us doubt ourselves in our business, he prepared for it. Now, I'm not suggesting that we metaphorically ingest something toxic like iocane powder in order to build up an immunity. But what we can do is focus on building up our own self-confidence and our own self-belief so that something as small as someone else's opinions won't shake us. Okay, so the question that I want to ask you this week is, what is something that you can start doing today to build up your immunity against other people's opinions? Let me know in the comments. I hope you liked that video, and more importantly, that you found it helpful. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing it with a fellow solopreneur. And make sure you check out the description for links to how we can connect and maybe even work together.